The purpose of environmental interpretation as a class is to kind of get us out of or beyond maybe the mindset of I'm a forester, I'm going to be way off in the woods, and I'm never going to interact with any human beings ever again in my life, and it's going to be awesome. A lot of us get into forestry because we're kind of introverted, and people are exhausting and terrible, and everything. But as it turns out, doing forestry, resource, in rec, in wildlife habitat management and conservation, we got to interface with people at some level. And so environmental interpretation is one of several forestry profession clusters that helps you, me, all of us to interface with individuals like clients, but also with broader collections of other human beings like the public, and provide some pretty useful tools and frameworks for us to do that so it's not completely exhausting, so it doesn't go completely off the rails, and importantly, so that we can get beyond just sort of the regular social bullshit that we all have to navigate and get into some meaningful connections and interactions with people. Legit. In an ethical way. So, the catalog's way of expressing that sounds something like environmental interpretation is the profession of building connections between protected areas and visitors to users of that area. So if you want to go into conservation police work, you might have some people showing up at that front gate who have different ideas than what is legal on what's okay to do at that protected area, at that wildlife refuge, at that national forest, at that park, right? Like it might be pretty fun to run around Shawnee National Forest with a gun on your hip and go target shooting. And that is strictly a legal thing. But it's also something that the conservation officers, in that case the title is Forest Protection Officer, they probably want to know about that so they can just double check and make sure nobody else is going to be in the area that that person wants to go target shooting and stuff like that, right? So environmental interpretation provides us a way to meet up with that person and be like, hey, if you want to go target shooting on the Shawnee plinking, that's awesome. Let's figure out how to do that so you have a blast of a time, no pun intended, but also that everybody else gets to walk away from that situation too. Everybody wants to get home to dinner nice and safe and alive and not perforated unwillingly. So, establishing personal relevance of and appreciation for a natural area often leads to behavioral changes among visitors to parks and wildlands. That's a fancy way of saying, look, if people know about the place that you're working at, that you're trying to protect, using all these tools of forestry that we pick up, if they understand it a little bit more like you do, if they know as much or approaching as much as you know about the place, they're a lot less likely to just tear it up. A lot less likely to leave it covered in litter, like some trails around Sedona, it sounds like, and so forth, right? So how do we do that? How do we have those conversations with folks without coming across like, you're bad for being here, don't litter, you're a horrible person, go away, right? That's not elevating anybody. How do we have that conversation without kind of just browbeating people as a conservation police officer? How do we de-escalate negative situations, but also how do we take somebody who has, like, we're all just trying to make it out here, right? Somebody who has a high school education, they've never taken a forestry class in their lives, they're not thinking in terms of ecology, conservation, the stuff that you and I are really passionate about. How do we take that person and uplift that person to not only maybe learn some of the stuff, the knowledge, the facts that you and I have learned, and that you will acquire a lot as you get out there in the professional world, but how do you foster an appreciation, like a genuine valuing of those things? Some folks are going to be right on that wavelength with you, like they're going to pass the vibe check. And other folks, like, they're not anti-wildlife, they're not anti-conservation, they just don't know one way or the other, right? Life is hard, we're all busy working, we're just trying to make it. So, this course, in order to help get you there, to help those folks get there, This course will examine the philosophies, the ethics, the research methods, and the controversies involved with modern environmental interpretive practices within the context of park and wildland management. So it's a very long sentence, but we're going to look at how these people do this stuff all day long. And that is as a collateral duty and a set of soft skills, as they're called, for conservation officers, and for folks who want to go specifically into environmental interpretation to be an interpretive ranger, which is like a whole other full-size division at a lot of these protected areas, alongside the conservation police officers, alongside the fire crews, alongside the wildlife technicians, catching and releasing, banding wildlife, stuff like that, right? That's a full freight, whole cluster of careers. So this class is your entry point into an entire cluster of forestry job titles and so forth. All right. You'll be given opportunities to synthesize the topic areas in the course into hands-on experience. We're going to do stuff in this class through numerous class exercises, possible quizzes, and some kind of a final exam. All right. So that's kind of the broad narrative goal of the class. If I'm doing my job, that's the finish line we're hopefully going to cross by the end of the semester in early May. In order to sort of break that out into more specific learning objectives, these are not necessarily in order, but they are kind of a conceptual grouping and structuring of what we actually got to get through to accomplish that broad narrative goal. All right, so course learning objective 1. Understand the historical context of environmental interpretation. Different careers have different lifespans to date. So modern chemistry is about 200 years old. Before that, we called it alchemy. That's pretty cool. Turns out there's a lot more to do in a chemistry lab than just try to turn stuff into gold. And so we get modern chemistry out of that. Modern forestry is maybe 150 years old. Environmental interpretation as a kind of a sub-discipline under the big umbrella of the big tent of forestry is about 100 years old, right about 100 years old. So we want to understand that the way things are now is not the way things used to could be, as they say in the South. And we'll kind of trace a little bit of that development. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on history in this class. It's more of a hands-on, let's practice stuff kind of a class. But we do want to know where we started so that we understand why we ended up where we ended up right here today and kind of where we're going from there. So that's objective 1. Objective 2, philosophical and ethical foundations. We want to understand, like, the answer to the why question. Why is this a thing? Why can you get paid doing this? Why is it important enough to pay entire professions of people to do stuff like this on the Shawnee? So when I say interpretation in this class, and the class title is environmental interpretation, really that's kind of too broad of a label, because underneath environmental interpretation as a career track, we've got historic interpretation, talking about human presence on forested and other protected area landscapes. How did Crab Orchard Lake, trick question, look like to the Native Americans in the area before it was a lake, right? If we can connect with the lived human experience of other cultures in this same place, or if we can get our visitors, when they visit the Grand Canyon on a return trip north of Sedona, if we can get visitors to the Grand Canyon from like Dubuque, Iowa, like ratchet, basic, regular folks like you and me, to connect with and understand any of the dozens of other living cultures affiliated with the space of the Grand Canyon, that's going to be a way better trip than just like going to the big ditch and looking over the edge and being like, how neat is that, honey? Pretty neat. Okay, let's go get corn dogs. Now, corn dogs are awesome, but there's so much more. Like, we're leaving a lot on the table if people are just there for ice cream, corn dogs, and big views, right? So that's historic interpretation. There's also environmental interpretation. And we probably have a lot to say in that environment as forestry people and wildlife people. So we got a couple of different sub-flavors under this environmental interpretation tag. And that's all based out of the philosophical foundations of why we do environmental interpretation, why we do Interp in general. Okay? So, because environmental interpretation is interacting with people, and a lot of environmental interpreters or historic interpreters or cultural interpreters, they're doing what they're doing, and like a big agency, a state agency, MDC does a lot of environmental interpretation. Missouri Department of Conservation, Missouri State Parks, IDNR, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the United States National Park Service. Every federal land management agency does interpretation because the government provides a lot of this. We need to think about at least think about what it means to have a government agency signing your paycheck and what that means for your communication with the publics, right? Because governments in the past, I would never go so far as to say the United States federal government has ever used like propaganda or persuasive communication techniques that go so far as to be manipulative, right? Just kidding, we'll totally watch some examples in class just so we can spot it. We want to be real careful about handling the responsibility, the ethic of potentially influencing people's trips, potentially influencing people's lives through that interaction on that trip. Because when you take some visitors under your wing at the Grand Canyon, you might just change somebody's life, a little bit or a lot, right? You can't go to a place like the Grand Canyon and be totally unaffected by it, unless you're like me and you have a cold, shriveled, dead heart beating in your chest. Barely. So that's a lot of the ethical consideration of being an environmental interpreter, right? What are the stories we tell? What are the facts and the factoids, we'll talk about the difference between those two, that would curate into and out of those communications? That's a big deal, right? So, do we have a conversation as modern Americans about how, our government has run tests on the public in secret, some of them involving radioactive substances in the 1950s, right? This is a big deal. People are affected by the choices of the agencies that you work for. So what are the ethical considerations of being a persuasive communicator in forestry? Next, we're going to talk about interpretive topic identification and assessment. How do you choose what to talk about? A lot of the time when you're an LEO, a law enforcement officer in a protected area, force protection officer, something like that, right? You have a lot of discretion in how you run each one of those encounters with people, each one of your presence patrols through a campsite, each one of your interdiction attempts, somebody who's speeding, shooting off fireworks, poaching, right? Any of the things that might cause you to have some kind of an interesting or intense interaction, you have a lot of control, a lot of say in how that encounter goes, right? And there's a lot of training that goes into that. So the same thing is true, but even more so, you have a lot more say in what and how you communicate with your publics in environmental interpretation. As a profession, it is one of the most open and flexible forestry fields. Like, you get to choose more of how and what you do each day than, for example, in urban forestry and tree work. And that's not a knock on urban forestry and tree work. My power went out twice for a total of like 20 hours on Sunday and Monday, and my house got pretty cold and we were about to bust some pipes. Like, we appreciate tree workers, big time. But when you wake up in urban forestry doing urban tree care, you're pretty sure you're going to be doing more or less the same-ish kind of thing every day. That is not, absolutely not true for environmental interpretation. Okay. So, how do you decide what to tackle? What to talk about with people, and how do you talk about, how do you interact with folks, not just talking with them, but writing books, putting together interactive maps, electronic displays, guiding hikes, taking people on cave tours like you might experience on a field trip, etc. Right? How do integrate multidisciplinary insights is our fifth learning objective. This is a big one because the moment we start in this class putting together interpretive content to practice this semester, you're going to start coming up on things that you don't know yet. So how do we just kind of stay with what we know? How much do we reach a little bit past that to learn something new to bring to our participants, people we're interpreting with? Like, you can reach too far and do a bad job of staying shallow, trying to jam 6 gallons of bullshit in a 5-gallon bucket. Or you can use some of these frameworks that we're going to be talking about to figure out how do we go deeper on this? And how do I make it safe and appealing to my guests, my visitors, and so forth, to go deeper with? Does that make sense? All right, this is a pretty high, lofty language. This is really important not to lose hold of this. How do we choose what to rule in and what to rule out? Big deal. Real big deal. All right. Next learning objective. Practical skills for effective interpretation. If we're just lecturing about this stuff, looking at PowerPoints about interpretation, that's going to be like dancing about architecture. Maybe it's a good show, but who cares, right? You guys aren't here for the PowerPoints. We're here for actual skill acquisition, so we're going to be doing a bunch of skill acquisition practice and run after run after run of Interp. We're going to design games, which is deceptively hard to do well. We're going to play a lot of games. We're going to facilitate a lot of games so that, hopefully, nobody loses any fingers, nobody loses any eyes, right? We don't want any maiming injuries among our guests. All right. Next, we're going to focus on audience-centric interpretive strategies. So the United States National Park Service, over the past 10, kind of 15 years, they've gone through a couple of waves of national level at all over 400 units of the national park system, national sort of inventories and evaluations of all of the interpretive stuff, like the exhibits, the movies, the guided hikes, all that stuff. And they've had a chance now with some researchers, like a bunch of our colleagues here and at other universities, to kind of take a step back from those evaluations and be like, all right, so we paid people to go through all of these couple of thousand different interpretive experiences, right? Each hike at Mammoth Cave National Park through the cave system would be one of those experiences. Let's figure out what's working and kind of what isn't working, right? We can just throw a bunch of effort at this and hope it turns out okay, or we can take a program evaluation eye towards this and try and get a little bit more sophisticated than just working hard and looking busy. Make sense? So we'll talk about some of that stuff a little bit later in the semester, after we've had a chance to start getting some practice in, and we'll start to see, as we're leading each other on hikes around campus, for example, we'll start to see some stuff that works really well, and some stuff that, it doesn't work great. It's not terrible. We're not hating life going on your hike, but maybe this one part of it can be tweaked. Maybe we talk about this one thing that's kind of confusing or boring in a different way that makes it just absolutely pop. Absolutely explode in terms of engagement and inspiration. Next, we're going to look at development of interpretive materials and programs. This is a throughout the semester learning objective. So it's just, let's practice putting together facilitated games, putting together board games and card games, putting together hikes, putting together all the different modalities, which is a fancy way of saying different ways to accomplish the same content in printed form, in live form, in electronic form, whatever. Those are all just different modalities. So we're going to practice a bunch of different ones. And if you're like anybody else who's ever taken this class, if you're like me, like any normal person, you're going to love some of these. And you're going to want to go pretty hard on those. And some of them, you're going to just wish I'd never opened my fat trap and said, all right, let's all try this. But try it once, Just try it once. See if you like it. All right. Ninth learning objective, continuous improvement, professional development, and program evaluation. So this is going to pair well with objective 7, the audience-centric interpretation strategies. we're going to get comfortable with providing honest and useful feedback to each other, right? So we're not going to needlessly or wantonly destroy anybody's fees, but we are going to provide useful hints and coaching to each other as classmates on, hey, this went really well, like the material you put together is awesome. Also, it makes me feel a little bit ick when you stare at me without blinking for 12 minutes straight. Let's lubricate those eyeballs every once in a while and look at anybody else other than just me the whole time, right? So we're going to practice on enough eye contact. Like, it's weird to never look at people in the eye. That can be tricky for people who experience social anxiety. So we'll talk about some techniques around managing that, right? All of this is acquired skill. None of this stuff you're born like roundhouse kicking out the womb, ready to environmentally interpret. We're going to try a bunch of this stuff on. We're going to coach each other towards each person's individually more effective styles, right? Some folks are really going to be amazing at writing a book or making a map in GIS that is powerful as interpretive content. And other folks don't want to touch GIS with a 10-foot pole. And if that's you, I feel you, right? It's all good. So those folks, maybe lean into the live action interp stuff a little bit more, okay? So those are our learning objectives for the semester. I have 2 textbooks that are required-ish for the class. I'm going to say that because we're recording it. They're really old on purpose because the whole buying new, very expensive textbooks treadmill is a joke and a scam in an industry, and we're not going to play that game. So if you can find a used copy of either or both of these books online, awesome. Use a website like Alibris or Half Price Books or something like that. Amazon, if you really got to pad out Jeff Bezos' space exploration budget. And get especially the Signs, Trails, and Wayside Exhibits book. It is super non-technical. It's not a whole bunch of 10-cent words and multisyllabic nonsense. It's just a whole bunch of examples from the real world, all over the world, of what worked well. How much do you curve this path to make it interesting and effective as an interpretive path instead of a long-distance hiking trail? What color and size do you make this sign? What angle do you tilt it back? And what material or substrate do you use to construct that sign so that you're not burning people's retinas using a high glare construction, right? It's a very practical book. So, especially for anybody who is looking at, or even just in passing, thinking about going into any kind of human-facing forestry career, like where you got to talk with or interact with people or the public, right? Look at getting one or either of these books. These are going to help shortcut you to being much more effective and lower stress in those interactions, all right? I don't care if you guys, I hope you do actually, share the books around. Like, if we get 3 copies of the textbook across everybody and we're like passing it around before class so folks can skim it before that class, great, awesome. There used to be copies of the books in the forestry reading room. I think some of those might have walked off from previous students forgetting to return them or whatever, but at least take a look in the room, and the first person to reserve any of the books on University Library System or the statewide interlibrary loan system, you get the books for free, right? So that's a pretty good deal. But for those of you seriously interested in putting this class forward towards your progress professionally, like you want to go into this stuff, start building your professional library. These are some good, well-tested books. I can give you a couple of others if you're very interested and you're serious about this stuff. Like, you want to get hired by the Park Service to live and work in beautiful places and interact with people and help them fall in love with those places. Let me help you blast off from this class. Any other materials I'll post on our course website. There's not a lot of them, mostly some short videos that we'll watch in class. Grading system is on the 10s like all my classes. 90 and up is an A. I'm happy to round up your 89.499996. That's fine. If you give me any excuse to do so, right? I'm not trying to make your lives hard in terms of GPA, but in order to give you the benefit of the doubt, give me something to work with. Participate in class, right? This is a very interactive class. Hopefully we spend as little time as possible doing what we're doing right now. The didactic, passive receptive model of you guys sitting there, not moving, not doing anything, just listening to me talk. This is the lowest effectiveness thing in terms of retention and skill building that we do all semester right now. So we're trying to get it out of the way. But when we have class, show up. When we're designing games, design a game. Get ready to play games. All right? Cool. That's participation. And to the extent that you do that, we can make this class pretty all right. We might have some quizzes. I don't like quizzes, but I got to grade something. In particular, what I can evaluate, guys, gals, and non-binary pals on are these. You'll see these a bunch throughout the semester. This is just a staffed project feedback form. Like if you take us on a guided hike through Thompson Woods to interpret a topic about the woods, for example, then your classmates are going to fill this out, and I can use that to give you an A. Great. For non-staffed interpretation, like a board game, a card game, a book, a map, something like that, where you're not live there interpreting the thing to people, we have a similar feedback form. All right? So, to the extent that you guys are filling these out for each other, this is a structured, scaffolded way for you to provide helpful feedback to your classmates so that you can help them be awesome while they're helping you be awesome at environmental interpretation. For all of these class exercises, it's gonna involve a little bit of writing, but not to the point of writing essays or scripts. So an essay is something that somebody else reads. A script is something that you read to somebody else. That's boring to experience somebody just kind of talking at you, like right now, right? So we're going to use things like bulleted outlines to get you off of a script, to get you off of rote memorization, to get you away from routine, the rut, boring, right? Your participants are going to typically mirror back to you the level of passion, interest, enthusiasm that you are putting out. Right? They are looking for cues from you on how to think and feel about the topic that you're passionate about. Make sense? So, with that, with these feedback forms reflecting your in-class practice and stuff, with all these class exercises, we're going to go through a lot of drafts on each of these, and I'm not going to care a lot at all about things like your handwriting, or do you end every sentence with a period? Now, for the final draft of any non-staffed interp, where it's important that somebody who's off the street from the public without the benefit of a college forestry degree, they could come in and read the instructions to that game, and it's got proper spelling, grammar, no run-on sentences, so forth. So on final drafts, at the end of the semester, grammar, spelling, formatting, all that stuff counts. We're just trying to make it usable for our people. But for everything up to that point, I don't care. Neither should you. Okay? Cool. All right, so handwritten stuff, totally okay in this class, up until that final draft. Late stuff doesn't really help. This class moves pretty fast. We have a lot of throughput, a lot of stuff to do in this class. So if you're getting behind, come talk to me, right? I'll help you work it out. I'll get you caught up. We'll get things worked out. But you gotta come to class. You gotta come ready to rock and roll in class. And if you're really sick, don't come to class, because that will make more people sick. That's presenteeism and is a distinctly American problem. But otherwise, show up. Be ready. Let's do some things. You guys are paying a lot of money to do this, right? Tuition is ridiculous. So let's get the value out of all of that. Come ready to rock and roll, and I will meet you there. This class, we do have a required field trip, because it just doesn't work if I'm telling you about these things and we don't actually see it out in the wild. So for those of you who've done summer camp, we've seen some environmental, historic, and cultural interpretation examples out, mostly with the National Park Service and Forest Service, all across the country. Wherever we went that summer that you took summer camp. But for the rest of us, we gotta go on a field trip somewhere. So let's take a minute and decide as a class what we'd like to do field trip wise. Now, if we come up with a field trip weekend that doesn't work for you, like you gotta work that weekend just to make things meet, that's okay. Find some time anywhere in the semester to go and see professional interpretation, live or unstaffed, even somewhere as close as on campus within a lot. Okay, you don't have to spend a ton of money and go back to Sedona to find some good stuff to count as an alternate field trip assignment. But you do need to go find somewhere where it is absolutely professional presentation. Crab Orchard, Shawnee. There's lots of options close by. There are probably lots of options that you haven't thought about as environmental interpretation or historic interpretation all throughout Chicagoland, all throughout the greater St. Louis area, or wherever you're from. Okay? Cool. So, first exercise for the class. Where would you like to go? Mammoth Cave National Park. It is about 4 hours east-southeast of us. It is a karst or wet cave of the Green River system in central Kentucky. They do all kinds of environmental interp there about the bats, the cave system, the karst geology, the water table, the river Styx, the cave springs. They do a lot of historic interpretation about enslaved people working as guides there. They do a lot of cultural interpretation of First Nations and Native Americans peoples who predated white settlement of the area, and some of whom are still around. So Mammoth Cave has kind of everything. It's a great one-stop shop. There's good fishing, hiking, mountain biking. Really don't want you rock climbing in the cave, but there are other places nearby for that. We could go to Mammoth Cave. This would be like a Friday, Saturday, part of Sunday trip. That's east, southeast. We could go to the west, the northern Ozarks. For example, Ozark National Wild and Scenic Riverways. It was the first Wild and Scenic Riverways created under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1968. It's a pretty cool spot. There is a lot of environmental interpretation going on there. It is also a karst system with over 600 known cave entrances in the approximately, on average, like 3/4 of a mile wide, 168 mile long park. There's also like Yellow 11 Point, Buffalo, Neango, a whole bunch of other rivers there for canoeing. The Mark Twain National Forest and the Peck Wildlife or Conservation Ranch are also all wrapped around the Y-shaped riverways system. So we've got Ozarks National Scenic Riverway, Mark Twain National Forest. If I were cynical, I would say it's just the Shawnee with a fresher coat of paint, but it is its own national forest in its own right. There are also some interesting state parks, like Montauk State Park at the north and upstream end of Ozark Scenic Riverways, that serves as a WAMCON interesting fisheries breeding project for trout. They farm up a couple of million trout a year at that one facility and then release them into rivers all over the state for the sport fishery industry. This is not the Montauk that Gwen Stefani was singing about when she sang that she's got Bangkok to Montauk on lock. Rhyming dictionaries for the win. All right. So we've got an east trip, we've got a west trip. We could go northwest for those of you who like to kick around Greater St. Louis. Cahokia Mountains, right? Historic and cultural interpretation. The St. Louis Zoo. and City Museum. Those of you who like to drink and go down big slides. They do a bunch of environmental education and interpretation, which are not the same thing, but they are adjacent to each other, using some of the same techniques. All right? Over the years, these are basically our best 3 options for this class, and I don't have any particular horse in this race. So let's answer any questions you have about any of these sites, provide any additional inputs or insights into any of these that you guys are familiar with that I haven't mentioned here. And then let's vote. So, any questions, comments, verbal abuse about any of our 3 trip options? Yeah?
So, for like Mammoth Clave and I'd imagine the Ozarks, we would probably camp there.
Yep.
2 or 3 nights. Well,
2 nights. Yeah. And I have a bunch of camping gear for anybody who doesn't. Yeah.
The zoo, what day thing?
The zoo's most of a day, yeah. There's a lot of stuff there. When you're actually there to see how the interpretation is done instead of just like poke at the animals in their enclosures. Yeah. There's a ton of stuff there. A ton of stuff. Live and non-staffed. So there's Forest Park, all that stuff. There's a lot around St. Louis, of course. And a couple of state parks near there as well. Other questions or suggestions, clarifications? Matt?
You said it's going to use like Friday. Like what time on Friday?
It's like most of my classes. We'll pick, like, do we want to leave at 7, 9, 1 p.m., something like that. Just kind of based on everybody's class schedule. It varies a little bit every year. So, yeah. It's on the way to Mammoth, kind of. But it's long and skinny and takes a lot of extra time to drive. So if we want to do that, we can. But that would trade against how much we have on target at Mammoth Cave, which is cool either way. They do a bunch of Interp there too. That's a good call. All right. Any other questions? Any nominations from the floor for spots to include or an entirely separate trip within about a 4-hour radius? Scratch Brewery does not count. Yeah, if we pick something in Carbondale, we could go like field trip wise every week. We have so much fuel budget for that. Oh my gosh, fuel budget for days. No. Nothing else? All right, cool. Vote for as many or as few of these as you like. Vote up to 3 times. So, anybody in favor of going to Mammoth Cave? A grand, gloomy place, as I say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9er. Okay. How about west to the Ozarks? Mark Twain National Forest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How sure is that any is? Yep. 6. All right. And Greater St. Louis at Wretched Hot of Scum and Villainy. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Cool. All right, so Mammoth Cave got 50% more votes than the next closest competitor, so plan on going to Mammoth Cave. Go ahead and pull out your smartphone, tablet, or other web-enabled device, and let's take a look at what weekend, what Friday, Saturday, Sunday might work for you. I'll pull up our academic calendar. Through Mammoth Cave? No, one of the tours is a lantern tour by boat, which is available some years. So you can get on the water if you want to, if that's available. Other than that, yeah. Say again? 10 is a lot for a short hike for some, so I don't want to presume. Let's see. Last time we were set to go to the Ozarks, and they had some catastrophic, like they had a super nasty winter storm there, and then they had a bunch of flooding that shut down and ripped out a bunch of the boat launches, so we were like, well, maybe we'll just stay local. So, didn't work out so much last time, so I'm ready to get out there again. All right. Let's see, we probably don't want to look at like the next 2 weekends because people have jobs and you need to provide a little bit of scheduling look ahead if you want to get to that job. Spring break is the weekend of Saturday, March 8th through Sunday, March 16th. Okay. So that dog ain't gonna hunt, as they say. But other than that, anytime before the weekend of Friday, May 2nd. Okay, so.
What would be the best time to go in your experience in doing this?
So I like cold weather camping, but that's not everybody's jam. So, like, very end of February at the earliest, probably for anybody who's not looking to do that.
So March or April would be the two best months.
Yeah, March is typically a little bit cooler, a little bit wetter. April is warmer, drier, and prettier with a lot of blooms and stuff. If anybody wants to Google morel hunting around the area, that is a permissible and legal thing and a really awesome thing to do there with that particular karst geology and the forest overlying it. I think that's for them maybe mid-March, something like that. So if you guys want to gather morels, they're delicious. Cook up like steak. All right, so we'd be looking at, let's start. Weekend of February 14th, so 14, 15, 16. February 21st. February 28th. March 7th. March 14th. No, March 14th is spring break.
Yes.
March 21st. March 28th. And we got to stay out of May for exams, so April 4th, 11th, 18th, or 25th. All right, so we'll start the bidding with February 14th for all of us Forever Alones who aren't worried about expensive reservation. No? All right. I'm just kidding. My wife is beautiful and amazing, and I married up. Okay. Cool. So, does anybody have any questions about the dates? Okay. March 7th is the front end of spring break, so
Oh, yeah.
I think that's our best working list. If anybody's aware of anything, I don't know, like, do you guys care about like prom or spring stuff like that? I don't know. Some people. I went to college in the deep South. promenades were so important to them, and I don't know why. Yeah.
I am like for the medieval comic conference and an event on this Saturday, April 4th, and I'm the president.
Okay. All right. Does anybody know when SalukiCon is? That's a big campus thing. All right. Me neither. I was just asking. Okay. All right. Cool. So, vote for as many of these as you would like, and we'll narrow it down probably to top 2 or 3 close tied leaders, and then narrow down from there. Typically, what we want to do is, just in case we get nasty spring weather, pick the earliest of the top contenders, and then have the subsequent weekends as maybe they don't have flash floods that following weekend or something like that. Okay. This is a wet cave system, so the river system can rise or fall 30 or 40 feet in that highly constrained channel morphological regime. For those of you forest hydrologists out there, a rare and vanishing breed. Here we go. So, anybody in favor of the weekend of February 14, 15, 16? 3. All right. February 21st, 22nd, 23rd. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, February 28th, end of the month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right. Okay, not March 7th, not 14th, March 21, 22, 23. Second half of March. There we go. All right, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Unanimous.
That's never happened.
And the 28th, very last tail end of March. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. All right. And wrap it around to April. April 4th, 5th, and 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. April 11, 12, and 13. 2, 3. 3. All right. April 18th. Getting into kind of the last quarter of the semester. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. And last option, April 25th. That's getting towards exam week. Okay. 1, 2, 2. Okay. There you go. All right, so that pretty well says to me, let's start with March 21st, and that gives us about 6 weekends of options, including that one to get out there. I know that a lot of you guys are working like campus jobs or something like that. That would make this very difficult, so I won't cancel and move off of March 21st, 22nd, 23rd, unless we absolutely have to, like last year when the physical on-site boat ramps and stuff were just washed away. All right, so cool. Plan on that. This is our first call to start assembling like a tent, ground sheet, sleeping bag that is warm enough. Plan on it being as cold as 20 degrees and bring a 3-season tent that can handle a little bit of snow weight, because you just never know with all this climate change nonsense. John.
If anyone needs extra sleeping bags, I got two.
All right. I have a bunch of extra gear as well, tents, pads, yeah, whatever. Cool. If anybody has any, food allergies or like dietary practices or whatever, that's totally fine. We can work on all that stuff as we get a little bit closer. So think about what you need in those directions, and if you don't have access yet to like 2 full head to toe, skin out all the way out to thermal and rainwear outfits that have 0 cotton, now's the time to start checking out Goodwill, Salvation Army, local thrift shops for technical fabric clothing, so that if and or when we get wet, that it doesn't create any sort of a pre-hypothermia problem for you. So at 50 degrees and soaked and windy, that's enough to kill you from hypothermia. Got it? All right, cool. Looking good. What questions do you guys and gals and everybody in between have about the field trip? Any questions? Okay. Very cool. Sounds good. We have a bunch of WhamCon folks in the class, as we always do, so let's be sure to make some effort when we're on site at Mammoth Cave to get to some of the bat-oriented stuff. There's a whole lot of research and public messaging inside of the Interp is on about bat conservation and white nose syndrome caused by the non-native invasive fungus Geomyces destructans. Pretty wild stuff. It's pretty well burned its way through the Mammoth Cave system with its 95 to 99% mortality rate, and the populations are starting to recover. But that is a profoundly human-influenced story. That non-native fungus came over on human ships, arrived, made landfall in the American Northeast, and washed its way through. It's all the way through at least Missouri now. I don't know if it's made it as far as Carlsbad and places like that, but a lot of interesting wildlife stuff going on. So that'll be a great field trip. And again, as we get a little bit closer, we'll pick a time on Friday that we want to leave. And I'll get you guys and gals back as early as I can on Sunday so you can study and prep for whatever's coming up the following week. Cool. All right. Good deal. All right, pull out a sheet of paper. On this sheet of paper, I want you to make a list of at least 7 entries. 7. So this is nothing more than, you don't have to write sentences or anything, just a phrase to identify each of the at least 7 things. I want you to take a couple of minutes and reflect a bit on things that are important to you. List at least the top 7 in any order. What's really important to you? What are you passionate about? What are you really concerned about? Like, not a, gosh, I don't like this thing, but man, this gives me serious ick to even think about. What are you passionate about? What are you most concerned about? And or what is most important to you?
All within the same 7 each.
All in the same 7. Yeah. 7 plus. This can be stuff in your professional realm, things that you're studying about. Forestry stuff. Climate change. This could be stuff in your avocation part of your life. Things that you don't work on. Rock climbing. Chili cook-offs. Your dog, if you're from a culture that considers dogs not to be off. History. You're a big history buff, like more than, like you go way harder than the History Channel on Ancient Aliens. Another way to answer this question is, what do you find yourself, which among the million topics of your life, what do you not have a problem? What do you very easily put your attention on? Spend time on. Be something you feel positively about, something you feel negatively about. What do you find yourself spending money on and like not really experiencing a lot of friction with that? Like, man, I see this and out comes that Apple Pay or card or flash that cash. These 7 things. It can be very personal and individual to you. Or it could be something that is as broad as something like, man, I'm a diehard Star Wars fan, or I'm a Disney adult and I don't care about the negative connotation. Or, man, I like to full send, big drop mountain bike runs. I don't care that I break my body, it's fun. I live for this. What do you care about? What are you passionate about? What do you think a lot about? What do you orient a lot of time and energy towards? Maybe you run an Etsy shop of amigurumi and crocheting. Maybe you have a blacksmith set up in your rental house and you drive your housemates nuts just making knives all day long. Maybe you know how to brain tan hides and that's not gross to you, it's cool and functional. And come the zombie apocalypse, you're going to be the last one to go. Maybe it's Lionel trains, or specifically scale model trains, but not Lionel. Maybe it's cultivating that perfect strain of cannabis sativa, or indica. Or cooking. Maybe your friends describe you as a gym rat, and you never skip leg day.
Okay, they're short.
How we doing? Anybody need more time? Got at least 7? Okay. Anybody got more than 10? Show of hands. Anybody with expansive passions? Ah, there you go. Cool. So, hang on to that list for a hot minute. The way that we do modern environmental, cultural, and historic interpretation is by having an honest conversation with ourselves, our colleagues, and the public about lists like these. This is not a class about education. This is not a class to teach you skills about environmental education, even though environmental education and interpretation sometimes look similar-ish. Sometimes use some of the same techniques occasionally on accident. All right? They're sort of kissing cousins, but they're not the same thing. So we sit down and we have this conversation with ourselves, our colleagues, our fellow interpreters, director of interpretation in our national park, whatever. And we put together lists of not topics, the things that are important. So what I'm talking about here is the difference between passion and awareness. I am aware that street racing culture is a thing, and that teams of people will spend lots of money and tons of effort to drag race other people extra legally in their cities just for the sake of being the fastest quarter-mile car ride. It's about family, fast and furious or whatever. I'm aware of that. I'm not passionate about it, but those people are. Right? It's important to them. And when we start talking with folks who do street racing, for example, drifting competitions or stunting or whatever, what we find is that for a lot of those people, there's a whole world underneath that broad, basically almost useless topic of street racing or stunting or drifting, whatever. To them, it's about the challenge, the social world of it. Like maybe you never put your hands inside an engine manifold to get 1% more torque to the back wheels, but maybe, man, you would do anything for the people that you run into on that Friday night. Like they are your people, your tribe, your family of choice, not your family of origin. So there's a difference between awareness and passion, and we're looking for where there are passions, because that's the entry point into having meaningful conversations with people about things that are important. You and I have a lot of classroom hours racked up. We have a lot of textbook pages read, but we know a lot of stuff about forestry. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of that information, a lot of that knowledge about forestry is interesting and or useful to us as foresters, but it's not interesting or useful to everybody else. Those are the topics that we are not going to go after in this class. Like the difference maybe on a phylogenetic or morphological basis between Quercus alba and, I don't know, Quercus rubra, something like that, right? You and I, we're trained to know that difference, to spot it, leaf on, leaf off, and so forth. And nobody else cares about that, right? Maybe some of you don't care about it. That's okay, okay? Some of us just get the tree idea, that's something we got. And others are like, yeah, this is my thing. I like being able to walk out in the woods to identify a bunch of stuff and see what's going on. Maybe for So what we're looking for here are lists of topics. What are we going to interpret? What are we going to interface with our publics, our clients, our hike participants, our book readers, our map users? What are we going to convey to them? What conversation are we going to have with them? Those things are topics. And then out of that infinitely long list of topics, even just within forestry, there's an infinite number of things we could talk about. Stuff we could point out on a hike, right? But if the whole hike is just, that's a white oak, that's a jack pine, that's a longleaf pine, and we get to the end of the hike, maybe we have a couple of people who can identify a few more trees until they forget all this stuff the next day because nobody gives a shit. Or we can look for the interface of a topic that we know something about, but more than that, we are passionate about. And we look for ways to hook that passion about the topic, not the topic, that passion about the topic into the understanding and awareness of our participants, and from there, see if we can help them spark a passion about it too. So, I don't know a lot about foraging, but I sure had a good time, 2 springs ago, judging the backpacking / foraging club collabo foraged dinner competition, right? I don't know much about herbaceous species ID in the Midwest. I trained up on all this stuff actually in the Northeast, like the great boreal forest of southern Maine and Vermont and stuff like that. So I'm less functional on a starvation basis here in the woods of the Midwest. No excuse for that. I've lived here for 15 years, a lot longer than I did in the Northeast. Like, if I wanted it, I could reach out and grab it, but I apparently am cold and dead inside. So, the thing is, I do really like eating. And so when the president of the foraging club puts out an event like that to connect technical skill and knowledge, species ID, and where to find these things and how to collect them and prepare them for safe consumption and tasty consumption, so it's not just nutritional and non-poisonous, but it's also appealing, like it's interesting to eat. Well, I like eating. I'm passionate about not starving to death. So now we've got somebody who's passionate about foraging, interfacing with my passion about eating delicious and tasty foods. And I remember that weekend in detail. I don't remember a lot of my species studies classes. Right? I paid for those classes. I paid with my life and my time that I can never get back for those classes. I forgot most of that stuff. But I remember that foraging field trip because it connected with one of my passions. That is the heart and soul of interpretation. We have a lot of topics. We have a lot of facts. We have a lot of data. We got a lot of knowledge. We're going to step beyond all of those things, armed with all of those things, and we're going to interface with the passion attached to those topics. And that's where that happens. Sound good? So, what we're going to call a topic that is invested with passion and also meaning and importance and significance. Right? We're moving from knowledge to wisdom, factoids to what matters, what is important, what is valuable. We're going to move from topics to themes. All right? So, in this class, for example, I've had a couple of students over the years who are like weirdly excited about tree ID. like super into it. Like that's my fetish. And we got beyond the topics of what trees are in Thompson Woods and what kinds of acorns do they, what other mass-producing species do we have nearby that don't have too many tannins in them. 2, hey, let's go for a walk through Thompson Woods. Let's gather some acorns that we find. And when we get back, I'll show you how to process those acorns, wash out the tannins. We'll turn those acorns into flour. And while we're eating acorn cookies, which are delicious, with application of horrifying amounts of sugar. They're delicious. And let's talk about the cultures that used to live right here before the modern American culture swept in and all that stuff aside. So we get from there are X and Y mass-producing species out there to let's enjoy some cookies and let's talk about entire cultures. See how we can interface and come to be aware of, be appreciative of, and feel any sense of meaningful human connection to those folks whose entire cultures are built around acorns and other mass-producing species. That make sense? Okay, so the way this class often goes, and I'm over time now, the way this class often goes is we're going to start with a lot of like foresty topics. It's going to take us a couple of weeks to give ourselves permission to turn that into a fishing trip or a baking and eating cookies experience or something like that. But that's where we're going. That make sense? All right, let's get out of here. I kept you over on the first day, form. Your assignment is to think about the stuff on your list and how we might turn that into some kind of a way, some kind of excuse, some kind of a method or pipeline to connect with something deeper, more meaningful, more significant. Because if you like XYZ, there's probably somebody else out there that does too. You'll probably like it for some kind of recognizable reason. All right? So that's where we're going. See you next time.